morning, you're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danny Laurel.
And I'm Jess De Los Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day Friday. A weaker peso and more government borrowings push the country's debt stock to a new record high.
Spacex is now preparing to enter the Philippine market. The Trade Department says Elon Musk's company is currently doing preparatory work such as site selection.
The Bangko Sentral warns the public to remain cautious with play-to-earn games involving NFTs. That's after hackers stole millions of dollars from a blockchain linked to Axie Infinity.
And the government plans to borrow at least 200 billion pesos from domestic lenders this month. We begin our broadcast with the country's national debt climbing to a new record high.
Now, data from the Treasury show that outstanding debt reached 12.09 trillion pesos as of end February. That amount is 16% higher from the 10.4 trillion peso debt recorded in the same month last year. Month on month, the debt increased by nearly 64 billion pesos on the back of a weaker peso and more borrowings. 70% of the debt portfolio came from domestic lenders, while the rest were from external sources. RCBC Chief Economist Mike Ricafort says government debt will likely go up following the issuance of dollar-denominated bonds in March. Meanwhile, ING Bank senior economist Nicky Mapa says the next administration may likely inherit what he described as a fiscal handicap given the projected deficit and debt levels. As of end February, the budget deficit narrowed year-on-year by almost 9% to 105.8 billion pesos. But on a month-on-month basis, the gap widened from the 23.4 billion peso deficit in January.
Elon Musk's satellite company Spacex is now preparing to bring Starlink to the Philippines. The Trade Department says Spacex is currently undertaking preparatory activities like site selection. The firm aims to bring broadband connection even to remote areas in the country. Trade Secretary Mon Lopez is hoping that the company can start doing business here in the Philippines as soon as possible. Lopez adds that SpaceX's timeline for setting up shop falls within the remaining 3 months of the Duterte administration.
Now, in other news, the Bangko Sentral is warning the public to remain cautious when dealing with play-to-earn games. This comes after hackers have stolen crypto worth over $600 million from Ronin. That's a blockchain project linked to the popular game Axie Infinity. BSP Governor Ben Jokno emphasized that there are risks associated with NFTs such as price volatility, cyber fraud, and scams. Axie Infinity creator Sky Mavis has previously said that about 35% of the game's traffic comes from the Philippines, but Yield Guild Games, a local players guild that loans out Axie Infinity assets, said its players were unaffected by the hacking incident. Now, to talk more about that big-time hacking incident on Axie and the risk that comes with play-to-earn games, we have on the show Luis Buenaventura, the second country manager of Yield Guild Games Pilipinas. Good morning, Luis. Thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, Just Danny. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so give us an idea first. What exactly happened here? This is not the first time we do believe that hackers actually managed to exploit a part of the system of the whole Axie platform. What does it say as well about weaknesses here in Axie that might actually be exploitable?
I think that the incident with Axie Infinity, it needs to bear some more explanation, no? Because the narrative that the money of the players were stolen isn't quite accurate. So I think that's one of the things I'd really like to clarify. But before that, I will say also that a lot of cryptocurrency projects, we have to kind of remember that they are in their infancy. They are works in progress. So the Bangko Sentral is not wrong when they say that we need to exercise caution. I think we should always exercise caution. But we should also inform ourselves of the nuances and the details of incidents like this, because it is often not what we expect or what we think they are.
Okay, but just to clarify, we care about the Philippine market here, right? And we just reported 35% of the players. Is that correct? 35%? That's
of the
quite
whole
a
market,
number.
at least for Axie Infinity, are local, are Filipino players.
From the Philippines, and yet no players on your roster have been affected.
Is that also the case outside YGG?
Yeah, how can this be?
Sure, yeah, okay. So let's explain what the hack actually was. So the hack happened on a particular project called the Ronin Bridge. Now, this is just one part of the entire Axie ecosystem. It's not the entirety of it, it's just one component of it. And very importantly, its purpose was to bridge the world of Axie with the outside world. And that sounds kind of like a vague description, but that's about as non-technical as I can get it. It was meant to bridge one world into another world. Now, why was no players affected? It's because there are many other bridges from the Axie world to the outside world, and Ronin Bridge was only one of them. In fact, it was not a very popular bridge amongst Filipino players because they chose to use many other established bridges as well. So what we believe has happened is that there was money that was in the bridge, but it did not belong to the actual players. It belonged to the institutions that were supporting Axie Infinity and the Ronin ecosystem. But this was not players' funds that were hacked or stolen.
Okay, interesting. But could this have happened in any other way, in the same way? Was it, just pure luck that it was that bridge that was hacked, or could it have been something that would have been a bigger
Or better
impact?
yet as well, are we just waiting here for that moment that other bridges or other platforms might actually be compromised as well?
I think that again, with young projects, there's always a risk of hacking. There's always a risk of security flaws. I mean, these are projects that are built by humans, after all, and humans are just flawed. I will say, though, that with every new incident of this type, the community, the industry as a whole, becomes stronger. And part of the reason for that is because they learn from each new incident. Now, granted, this was not a small amount of money, and it was certainly something that the industry needs to take very seriously. But I think that if you look at the narrative around what has happened, there are many other crypto projects that are all rallying around Sky Mavis and Axie Infinity to show their support, either by helping them monitor where the funds are going or by blocking off the use of those funds in other platforms. No? So the implication is that even if the hacker has all of these funds with them, they will not be able to spend it, at least not in a lot of these major exchanges or major platforms, because they're all monitoring what's happened. This is actually one of the nice things about blockchain. There's never any question of where the money is. Everyone can see where it is, so everyone can monitor.
Oh, so given that there's no need, at least there are no players who are at least trying to get their money back, but at the same time, what's the impact now for the current users of Axie here? Can local players still withdraw or encash their assets from Axie at the moment?
So it is possible for you to transact within the game right now. That part has not changed. However, they have turned off certain services for security reasons because they need to investigate it. It's only been a few days since this whole investigation has actually started. And as far as we can tell, they are hesitant to show any more details because it's really in the hands of the law enforcement officials at the moment. And as we know, you're not supposed to kind of share too many details because it's a developing case. I don't see that there's any indication that the players' funds are under any kind of danger. If anything, it's just going to be temporarily paused while the investigation is going on.
Okay, what are your thoughts on the Bangko Sentral warning against these sort of assets? Particularly now, they might have some reason to do even more regulation. And of course, cryptocurrencies were created to, so to speak, avoid having to be linked to a certain economy. You want to be able to be, transcend those issues, right? So how would that be appealing to consumers if it were to be more regulated?
There needs to be a balance between innovation and regulation. And as you can usually see, innovation and regulation are often in direct conflict with each other. Now, if we're not able to experiment and look for new ways to do certain things, you're not going to be able to grow as a technology or as a society. So you need to have some measure of freedom to experiment. But at the same time, you also need to have some way to protect customers. I think what's interesting here is that the Bangko Sentral knows what its job is in this space. It's both to foster growth and also to protect consumers and to kind of ensure a more fair kind of environment for businesses to proliferate in the country. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But we do have to understand that there's a lot of this stuff that is actually very deeply complex. And if we want to really go down this road where we want to look for alternative ways for income, for financial freedom, we have to be willing to loosen up some of our regulations in order to let that kind of experimentation happen. If we don't, we're just going to be stuck with the same old thing forever. And I don't think that's what anyone wants. I think people want something better.
Okay, how do you see this security concern, Luis, affecting the take-up of Axie Infinity here? What trend are you seeing here? And at the same time, give us an idea of the status of Axie in the Philippines. How many users really do we have here?
We're still well over 1 million. I believe it's 1.5 million Filipinos that are playing Axie Infinity. And I don't think that that's going to downtrend anytime soon. I think that Axie itself is still a deeply interesting game and the community still loves it. Very recently, very soon, there is going to be a new version of the game, in fact, that is going to open up and it's going to be completely free for players to get into. And that's going to have a new generation of Axie players being introduced to the game for the first time. I think that these are very important steps. I'm certainly very bullish about the future of the game, and we're deeply in support of Sky Mavis as a company. I think that Yield Guild Games considers the Sky Mavis founders not just as partners but also as friends. So we have no issue at all in continuing to support them, in the future.
Okay, and finally, plans for YGG, apart from, of course, Axie Infinity. What are you trying to build here in the country? You know, this came amid a pandemic where everyone was home, playing to earn and looking for alternative sources of income. Now that the economy is reopened, how are you going to play with that new reality?
We see ourselves as both an educational and a humanitarian organization, actually, because a big part of what we do is we want to help Filipinos at the base of the pyramid, Filipinos from the low-income part of the country, to find alternative sources of income within the crypto world. I mean, that's kind of our main driving force. So a big part of what we do is not just to connect them with these alternative sources of income, it's actually to teach them how to use them in a safe way, in a secure way. Sometimes that means, these kind of lessons like this one, where there was a hacking incident, and now this is a teachable lesson for the entire community. Even the games that we think are, the best of breed in this industry, they will still have some of these issues. But that being said, thankfully, no one was affected by it, as far as we know, within our own community. The humanitarian part of what we do, we were massively involved in the Typhoon Odette response last December to kind of the months preceding it. We raised over $1.5 million in crypto donations, and then we dispersed it to households that were affected by the typhoon. That's a really big part of our mission also. We believe that crypto opens up so many different opportunities, and what we're trying to do now is connect all of those opportunities with as many Filipinos as we possibly can.
All right, so interesting way, of course, taking these issues as an opportunity, basically, to improve as well the system and the platform. Thank you so much. That was Luis Buenaventura, the second, am I correct, Luis, country manager of Guild Games Pilipinas.
Metro Manila and more than 100 other areas will be under Alert Level 1 during the first half of April. That's from just 48 areas previously placed under the most lenient classification. Now, under Alert Level 1, business and social gathering venues may be filled up to 100% capacity as long as health protocols are observed. Meanwhile, more than 40 areas will be placed under Alert Level 2, where business establishments and activities are allowed up to 50% indoor and 70% outdoor capacity.
Now, this from the Philippine Star. ING Bank sees inflation peaking at 5% in May. That's given the country's exposure to the surge in global commodity prices. ING senior economist Nicky Mapa says inflation may quicken rapidly in the coming months, noting that the Philippines is heavily reliant on imported crude. He says this is also the result of elevated energy prices that have already manifested in the domestic market. Mapa noted that local fuel prices are currently 45% higher than the same period of last year, suggesting a stark pickup in transport costs and utilities. The BSP earlier said that headline inflation could accelerate beyond its target of 2 to 4%. The central bank projects the consumer price index to quicken by 3.3 to 4.1% in March. The PSA will release the March inflation data on Tuesday next week.
Pausing for a quick break. After that, investors begin a new trading quarter with questions whether Russia's invasion of Ukraine will cause more volatility and losses in financial markets.
We'll check how our local bourse is performing on the first trading day of the second quarter of 2022 when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
still watching Business World Live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel.
All right, it's the first trading day of the second quarter of 2022. Give us a look back on the first quarter performance here, Dan.
All right, Jess, it wasn't a great start to 2022. You can see on my terminal here the S&P 500 year-to-date, that's down by close to 5%. NASDAQ is down by 9.10%. The global share market or equities suffered their worst quarter since the pandemic bear market. Of course, three main things here since the first quarter. The Russia-Ukraine war, obviously, and that has moved the oil markets as well and caused inflation. You've also got the tightening of Fed Reserve over in the U.S. And finally, China's worst COVID outbreak since the early days of the pandemic. All of these things, of course, driving the prices of oil. You can see that at 105.11 again. Raw materials were the only thing that was giving, some gains here in the market. You can see as well the Bloomberg Commodity Index year-to-date just at an uphill trend here. But we are, of course, waiting to see the next set of talks between Russia and Ukraine. That's going to be on Friday. Now, let's take a look at our own index and how we've been performing here. Sideways here, we are down by 0.17%. So compared, honestly, to the rest of the global markets like S&P 500, NASDAQ, we're actually still in the green year-to-date as of today. Of course, very, very volatile. Nevertheless, you've also got one piece of data to be digesting here, Jess, which is quite positive, and that is the PMI. It's now being released by S&P Global, and that index has risen to 53.2. Now, recall that if the PMI is above 50, that's an expansion in manufacturing, and that is compared to 52.8 rather in February. This has been the highest reading we've seen since at least December 2018. So not too bad. Another good thing that's happening now is the banks. They're doing pretty well in terms of the loan growth, for instance. So let's take a look at the year-to-date in banks. February has shown quicker loan growth. That was up by 8.8% year-on-year. So our household consumption slightly up by 0.9% year-on-year versus a previous contraction in January. And speaking of banks, just a couple that I wanted to look out for. Union Bank, for instance, they are kicking off a 40 billion peso stock rights offer right now. That is down by 0.8% this Friday morning. And finally, Bank of Commerce, our newcomer to the bourse, slightly down. That is down by 0.3%, trading at 12 pesos and 18 centavos after, of course, its IPO yesterday at 12 and averaging on high at 12 pesos and 50 centavos yesterday.
Here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. The Finance Department is expecting the construction of 3 ADB-funded bridges in Metro Manila to start in the first half of the year. These include the Marcos Highway St. Mary Avenue Bridge, the Homeowners Drive A. Bonifacio Bridge, and the Cabayani Street Matandang Balara Bridge. Now, the DOF said these bridges will be financed through the $175.1 million loan from the ADB and are due for completion in 2026. The bridge's combined span is more than 3 kilometers all across the Marikina River. Finance Secretary Sonny Dominguez says these projects are crucial components of the Build, Build, Build program that will help the economy bounce back from the impacts of the pandemic.
The national government is planning to raise 200 billion pesos from the domestic market in April. The Treasury says the April auction of T-bills is targeted to generate some 60 billion pesos, while the auction of T-bonds aims to bring in 140 billion pesos. The April borrowing plan is smaller than the 250 billion peso program domestic borrowing this month.
Now, President Duterte has signed laws renewing the franchise of 6 broadcast entities, including Signal TV, for 25 years. Republic Act 11668 allows Signal TV to construct, install, maintain, and operate radio stations in Luzon for commercial purposes. Signal TV is the most subscribed pay TV provider in the Philippines after gaining more than 2 million subscribers in 2018. Other broadcast entities whose franchise were renewed include the Nation Franciscan and Soundstream Broadcasting Corporations, as well as the Iriga Telephone Corporation and the Real Radio Network. All right, so more years of service for us, I guess.
Exactly. You guys will still be watching us on air. Great news.
All right, and that's a first look into the business day this Friday, April 1, 2022. Join us again Monday next week at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News Live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danny Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. Have a great weekend. We are One News.